Question: do you feel hopeful about your life, about your circumstances and your future? Or do you feel hopeless? Well, today we're talking about hope with Pastor Ray Johnston of Bayside Church in Granite Bay, California. And believe me, you don't want to miss what he has to say. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Pastor Ray Johnston started Bayside Church in Granite Bay, California, on the heels of twin copycat suicides. The victims had obviously lost hope in a positive future. Yet we know that our God is the God of hope. But how can we access that hope when our circumstances might seem completely hopeless? Well, that's what we talk about in part 2 of our discussion. One of the things that you talk a lot about is hope.
You bet.
Did that come out of these two suicides, or did it start, at least in your mind, with these two suicides 15 years ago? That for some reason these two teenagers they lost hope.
1 Corinthians, or as we call it out here, 1 Californians, chapter 13, verse 13, it says God has 3 values that are 3 lasting values. 3 most important things to God: faith, hope, and love. And I thought about it, and I went, we major on faith. Every church has a statement of faith. I crammed 3 years of seminary into 5 years to study the Christian faith. We talk about love a lot. Nobody ever talks about hope. And it's like somehow we've cut that out, which is why there are so many Christians that are faithful but discouraged. And I feel like the single most important thing about a person, a church, a human being, or even a business is, do they have hope? Because with it you have a future, and without it you don't.
I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, but it's leading to something. Where does that hope come from for you?
There's a short answer and a complex answer. The short answer for me is this: if I have a solid foundation, you know what it is, for me it's the promises of God. If I have a solid foundation of God's promises, then what happens is I start to believe God has better days ahead. And when somebody believes God has better days ahead, anything's possible. I heard a counselor one time, and he said, if somebody just gets, they can be discouraged, 100%. He said if they get 10% hope, anything's possible. And I think when somebody gets a sliver of hope, then doors open up and anything's possible, and they start believing God has better days ahead. And there are a ton of verses I turn to all the time, because discouragement is ultimately about, in my inner core, do I believe God has better days ahead or not? And the reason I would believe that is not circumstances, but it's the promises of God.
Well, you talk about, I think, what you call the high hope quotient.
Yep.
And you have 8 of those. We don't have time to talk about each one of them individually. We talked about 2 or 3, but what are they?
You bet. To back up just for a second, for 150, 200 years, everybody thought you're going to do well if you have a high IQ. Then they figured out a lot of smart people aren't doing well. So then in the 80s they went, well, it's about your EQ, how do you do with people? Okay, and they figured out there's some nice people that crash and burn. I actually think somebody's HQ, their hope level, determines whether or not they're going to have a good future or not. And so it has taken about 5 years, but what we've done is gone, what are the factors? What are the 8 things? Turns out there's 8. What are the 8 things that if somebody is high in those, they have far less discouragement, far more hope, and probably have a future? And you want to just run through them real quick?
Yeah, sure.
First one is recharge your spiritual batteries. And if somebody's batteries are, car's dead battery, you're not going anywhere. Second one is release toxic thinking. The key to life is sometimes, what do I let go of? There are things that if I hold on to them, they're in trouble. Third is raise your expectation. I walked into a church that had just lost their pastor with some really bad circumstances. The first thing I said to this church is, God has better days ahead. And when somebody believes that and their expectations go up, you tend to get not what you expect. Jesus tipped his hand when he said to the disciples, and they were a mess. Okay, Peter's always whacking off some guy's ear and his mouth's always open, and Thomas is running around going, I doubt it. Jesus said, follow me and I will make you become fishers of men. Yeah. And I thought, Jesus wasn't focused on what they were like right now. He was focused on what they could become. And I think, show me a discouraged person. Show me a discouraged parent. They're probably focused on what their teenagers are like right now instead of somehow staying focused on what they can become. And I think when people stay focused on what they can become, their church can become, their finances can become, their life can become, windows open up, and I actually think they move in the direction of having that happen. 4 is be refueled by purpose. My experience has been this: passion and purpose go together. And when I meet somebody that's trying to do something great with their life for other people, their hope level's always higher and their passion level than people that are living for themselves. 5th one is play to your strengths. My life was changed in a seminary class forever when the professor got up and said, if you want to have an exciting life, a fulfilling life, if you want to get to the end of your life and go, that really mattered and I have no regrets, he said, do this one thing. I whipped out a pen and I go, what is it? And he said, find out what your spiritual gifts are and build your whole life around them. Anything else is going to lead you to mediocrity. And all you have to do to test somebody is say, write your name. Now switch hands and try to write it. It's discouraging when you're not playing with your strengths. Number 6 is respond to bad news in great ways, which I think, given where our country is, they're the only people that have a future. 7 is refuse to let go. Refuse to let go. And there are some things, sometimes you've got to keep holding on to God's Word. You've got to keep holding on to people that are good for you. You've got to keep holding on to a marriage, even when you may be discouraged about it. There's sometimes you just have, which leads to the last one.
Some things you have to let go of, some things you cannot let go of.
You bet. I mean, when toxic stuff, it will wreck your system, but there are some things you can't let go of. And it's true. Sometimes I meet folks, and as they're a Christian longer, they let go of the basics that help develop their faith in the first place. And I'm going, don't let go of worship. Don't let go of God's Word. And the last one is this, and sometimes, when all else fails, refuse to give up on yourself, on your career, on your calling, on your church. Some folks watching this may be tempted to give up on their marriage or their kids. They refuse to give up. God has better days ahead. Sometimes you got to just keep hanging in there. Those are the 8.
You can find out more about Pastor Ray Johnston and Bayside Church by going to baysideonline.com.